What's up? We are here with Hakeem Bradley. Hakeem, what's up, man?
What's going on?
How are you?
I'm doing good. I can't complain. It's a somewhat it was sunny, but now it's
Okay.
just regular Portland rainy, so I'm doing okay though.
Yeah, man. I was just in Vancouver last weekend and it was like cloudy, rainy the whole time. And being from LA, it's like amazing. But I wonder, how do you experience that all the time?
Yeah,
And not.
It's weird. Actually, the last maybe week or some change, it's kind of been like all four seasons in like one. It'd be freezing one day, then it feels like a summer day, then the next day is rainy but sunny like a spring day. And then
Okay.
you just need a hoodie the next day like fall time. So my body don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
are you from Portland?
No, I'm originally from Philly. So I like to look at myself as the Fresh Prince of Portland.
Okay. Are
So
you
yeah, that's
are you an Eagles fan?
Die Hard.
Man,
I
I'm a
mean,
Cowboys
look,
fan. Born and raised in Dallas.
Mike, I don't know if we're gonna be able to make
We
it
need
through
to
the rest
just
of this
cut it.
conversation, man.
We need to cut it. I remember being a kid. I remember being a little kid and my dad going to a Cowboys Eagles game in Philly. You know, back when those big puffy cowboy jackets were
Yep.
in,
Oh yeah.
and they were walking across the parking lot to get into the stadium wearing those Cowboys jackets. And so people just started throwing frozen cans of beer at them as they were walking by. And
Who
Philly
does
fans,
that?
man. Philly fans,
Oh,
bro.
they're
Philly
brutal. I mean,
fans.
let me try to differentiate we're brutal, but they're like a different breed of brutality. So yeah, it's different. But fly, Eagles, fly, you know?
Yeah, right. So originally from Philly. How long you been in Portland?
I've been in Portland since, man, it's already 2022. It'll be 14 years in August. So 2008, I was in eighth grade, and I moved out here with my mom and one of my siblings.
Okay.
And my mom had a couple relatives out here, so they were like, "Why don't you move to Portland?" And I was like, "I visited twice, Mom. That sounds like a terrible idea." And it was at first, but then we just stuck it out. And God made things happen in ways that we could only imagine and only experience had we come out here. So,
Mm.
He changed the trajectory of not only my life, but my mom's life and my brother's life.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's led it to where we are today. Clearly I stayed, so I must have liked something about
There you
it.
go.
Something about it.
Yeah.
I'm grown now, so I could just leave,
You can come down here to sunny Southern California.
Exactly.
Don't have to put up with any more of that rain.
Hey, I heard it never rains in Southern California.
Hardly.
You know, not very often. Not very often. And then when it does, everyone loses their mind. They don't know what to do.
Like the sky is falling, literally.
Exactly. And you're married, right? You married, you got one kid, two kids.
Yeah, my wife's name is Jasmine, and we've been married for 5 years in June. We met through my best friend, who happens to be her twin brother. And how that whole thing came about is crazy, but it worked out. So, and
That's
we have a
awesome.
2-year-old son named Ezekiel, and we're just thinking about what does it look like to expand the family and try to go for another
Okay.
baby.
There you
So
go.
we keep ourselves busy, clearly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about, the podcast you guys are doing and all of that, but you said something, we're a part of this Missional Labs program incubator with Tyler Preeb. What's up, Tyler? And we were the first day everyone was going around like introducing themselves, and I came to you and you were like, "What's up? My name's Hakeem. Came out of the cult of Black Identity or something like that."
A Black Identity cult.
Black
Yeah.
Identity cult. Yeah. So what is that exactly? Because I just listened to another podcast you were on and you touched on it briefly, but I don't know, give us like an explanation of that, the history and what brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. So the Black Identity cult amalgamation, whatever you want to call it, it's called the 5% Nation, aka the Nation of Gods and Earths. And it broke off from what is known as the Nation of Islam, which is what Malcolm X and a bunch of other folks were into back in the 60s and 50s. And they broke off from a couple other things that actually go back to a Pan-African movement from a guy named Marcus Garvey, who was actually a Christian, I believe. So how everything kind of goes from there is crazy. But essentially what I grew up in was this belief that Black people are the original peoples of the earth. We are the supreme race. What is some other stuff? Man, white people are the creation of some evil mad scientist named Yakub, which is a play on Jacob of the scriptures. There's this thing called the supreme alphabet, the supreme mathematics, and basically black people, like black men in particular, are like Allah incarnate, and then black women are kind of like herbs. So you got like God and herbs that create stuff. So it's kind of nuts. I grew up being taught like, yeah, you can call yourself God and that be accurate because you are a God. It even says it in the Bible. And Christianity is the white man's religion, all of that stuff. So that's what I got, introduced into the world into. And to go from that to following Jesus, and then following Jesus within a predominantly white context in a predominantly white city was like ironic. So I felt like God had to break off a lot of my preconceived notions about not only the faith that we subscribe to, but also my preconceived notions about white folks, about what does it mean to be black, all of this stuff, and started to give me a more holistic view on people. And yeah, break off some of the... It was nuts. So I grew up in that and then came to faith at 17. Through Young Life.
Cool.
And then I met this guy. Yeah, I met this guy named Phil Zahn. He was the area director for the suburb that I lived in. And I moved all over the city until I got to what's called Beaverton. That's the suburb I'm talking about. Moved to Beaverton, went to Beaverton High School, was just kind of filling out, the city. Like I'm not from there. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I'm used to being around folks that look like me or are Latino. And God did some crazy stuff, y'all. Like I got stories for days, but that's generally what I grew up in and where I am now. So I hope that made sense.
Give us one of the stories.
Yeah, I want to hear.
Yeah, so I remember vividly. I was sitting in Young Life, and Phil gave this talk about Jamba Juice. He was like, "Your life's kind of like a smoothie." This is the short version. Your life's like a smoothie. I'm like, "You already got my attention." I'm locked in. And he's like, throughout your life, you put in ingredients that don't belong, and it kind of makes the smoothie toxic. Jesus wants to take that smoothie back, renew it, not throw it away, but just renew it so it can't be tainted anymore. And I was like, yo, whatever that is, I want that. Not only do I like Jamba Juice, but I want an untainted smoothie. And we met
those,
up.
Youth pastors, man, they have some really good sermon illustrations,
they crush
don't
it.
they?
Yo, it was a really good example. And I remember so vividly, we're sitting in the Dairy Queen and he's like, yo, I want to walk with you. And I didn't know Christianese at that time. So I was like, where are we going? And he's like, no. Like, I want to do life with you. And I'm like, I don't know. I still don't know what that means, but okay. And that man pursued me ever since. And we're still close to this day.
Wow.
But the story I want to get to really quick is all of that led up to me deep diving into the faith. And I remember going to Young Life Camp that following summer, and this was going into my senior year of high school. And the speaker at the camp was given, it was like what's called the crosstalk. And we're watching the Passion of the Christ talk about intensity. We're watching the Passion of the Christ when Jesus is being crucified. And we're all sitting there like, holy smokes. Got like 800 high school kids looking at this super intense, gory movie. And then we get told, okay, go out into the field and just sit there in silence for 15 minutes. And we're like, and do what? He's like, no. Like, just go out there and think and contemplate what you just witnessed. And we're like, oh, okay, whatever. So as soon as we get out there, there's lightning strikes all across the sky. The prayer before we got sent out was for God to show up. And for 15 minutes, the sky is being lit up with lightning strikes. And I'm like, first of all, this is dangerous for us to be out here, but also there's no way that this is a coincidence. So we're all sitting out and then the bell rings and it stops. And that was the moment, not because I needed a miracle or whatever you want to call it to believe that what I was being convicted of was true, but it was that moment that sealed the deal for me where I was like, okay, he answered a prayer and I just witnessed it. Okay, this God has to be real. I believed it for a little bit, for a couple months now, but I'm really in. And yeah, man, that was, to experience that so early on was crazy.
What was it like leaving the 5%ers and becoming a Christian? Like, was your family super deep into that cult, or like what was that like?
Yeah, so my dad kind of, it's like that type of that Black identity code is really prevalent within like 90s hip hop groups and early 2000 hip hop groups. So if you listen to like Wu-Tang, like a lot of them are 5%ers, if not all of them. And if you listen to their lyrics, you're like, I see what they're doing. But it's not like, oh, if you leave this cult, like we're going to excommunicate you from our family. It's a different type of belief system. So my dad was into all of that. My mom, once they split, she went back to her roots of following Jesus. So my dad and I always had like a friction in our conversations about faith and culture and worldview and all of that stuff. And to this day, like we'll still get in a tick for tat, but not like argumentative or in a bad way. But it was really strenuous on our relationship, I think, for a good 2-3 years for sure. And then my cousins would just, they more converted to a traditional Islamic faith. I think they went to like Sunni, but still would question a lot of the things that we both grew up or we all grew up in. But definitely would question me, like, why are you subscribing to that white faith and blah, 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 blah. So it really sent me on a trail of how do I study the history of this faith that I'm now subscribing to? And what does that mean for people that look like me too?
What were some of the answers that you came up with there?
Yeah, I learned about a lot of the church fathers were people from Northern Africa and around the Mediterranean. And I read the Bible for once when I'm going, yo, the people in this book are like brown-skinned people. And that means something. Not that they got to all look like me, but they got some melanin in their skin. I mean, everybody got melanin. But I was like, oh, like, and then I'm reading about people from Kush, or I'm reading about people from, from the Far East. And then I'm learning about the Roman Empire and how the Roman Empire was actually multi-ethnic because it spread all over the freaking world. So that in and of itself made me go, oh my, it historically can't be a white man's religion or a white people's religion. It can't be. That is actually, how do I say this lightly? I just think that's stupid. Let me just leave it. I just think that's stupid. But once I started to learn that stuff, it made me have such a confidence that this faith is really, truly for all peoples everywhere. And when I learned about the Abrahamic promise, how it was this promise that God made to Abraham was supposed to go out to be a blessing to the nations. And then I learned what nations means. It's not like country states. It's like, it's ethnicity. So I'm like, oh, shoot. We're good. We're in the green. That doesn't mean that we have to ignore, church history and kind of some of the things that happen between people groups, especially as the faith is being weaponized or utilized for whatever reasons. But it is to say, at the essence, the way of Jesus is for everybody.
Amen.
Yeah. Sorry, I hope I'm not going on too long of tangents, but
no, we're here for all the tangents, bro.
No, yeah, that's great.
This podcast exists for the tangents.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going vast faith,
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right.
Exactly.
We're talking about all kinds of stuff. So, all right. So you meet Jesus as a teenager and you kind of are completely radically changed, which is cool because that's like my story also, just kind of 0 to 100 over the course of a couple of months, just like moments of it. And then for me, it was like this just fast track into the things of God, right? Like head first into, I went from like, I don't even think I believe in God to like, I'm going to be a youth pastor over the course of about 6 weeks. So what happened after that? So like through high school,
Pentecostal youth pastor,
Pentecostal youth pastor at that. Exactly.
Let's
so,
go. You took it up a notch.
I was like, I'm going to stand up on my lunch table this week. And,
did you ever do it?
I did.
You did not.
I did. Yes, I did.
You never stood up on your lunch table.
Yes, I did.
What?
Yes, I did. Bro,
come on, Mike.
Tell the story.
I had a Bible club. I did the whole thing.
You stood up on your lunch table in the middle of lunch?
Yeah.
Yes.
What happened?
I mean, it was one of those things. I look back on it and I was like,
I've known you for like 15 years and you've never told me this story.
Yeah, it was like it was similar to some, like, I'd come back from some youth camp, and like there was like some kid speaker there that had done the same thing. I showed the video or whatever. And I actually think funny enough, Judah Smith was the speaker at this youth camp and he told the story of him doing it in high school.
Oh, so you're trying to be like Judah.
And so I was like, well, man, I mean, if this is what you do, this is what you do.
What I'm doing.
Yeah. And to this day, my friends kind of still make fun of me of it because I think people thought it was kind of a joke,
right?
A little bit.
Right.
And so I kind of got, like 3 or 4 minutes into it and it was like,
You felt embarrassed.
Yeah, and then like tried to kind of like
you were like Peter walking on the waves,
basically.
And you looked down.
Yeah,
you started sinking.
Yeah, exactly. And then sort of turned it.
But at least you walked.
Yeah, I think I turned it into like. And we do a Bible study every Wednesday morning. See you at 7 a.m. There, bye.
That's how you landed the plane?
Yeah, bro. It was. I just. You
gotta have some kind of call to action. Every Pentecostal preacher has a call to action.
I ended it like basically I had everybody stand up, I waved my hand, and they all fell down in the lunchroom. That was how it
I commend you for that, dude. That's incredible.
You know?
Wow.
You know?
I never did that.
You. It shaped you, man. Look at you.
You know, exactly.
Ready to stand up on a table at any moment.
At a moment's notice.
And probably, who even knows what I said? Oh, man.
I'm sure it was really theologically astute.
Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah, man. Okay, so your story, you get saved, and then what? Like, you're in Portland. Yeah. Did you kind of go, I want to follow Jesus and I want to be in ministry? What's that process been like?
Yeah, so I think after I got back from camp, I got plugged into a local church in a suburb of Portland, and then I was thrown into the fire in a good way. Thrown into the fire as a student leader at the youth ministry that I was now a part of at this local church. Got involved in student leadership. From there, got thrown on stage and was like, okay, you should teach. And I was like, teach who? I was like, teach your peers. I was like, teach them what? My first conversation, my first teaching, I'll never forget this, was about Jesus, MLK, and racism. I was like, a way to start off, bro. So I'm like reading, my youth pastor kind of gave me some notes to kind of make my own. So I'm like trying not to read off of this script, but also talk on the fly and also not like shaking my boots. But that kind of gave me, not because I'm standing up there going like, oh yeah, I feel so cool, but there was something about articulating the way of Jesus to my peers and seeing them actually resonate while also sharing pieces of my story while addressing something problematic and showing how Jesus is the remedy to that. And I said, okay, I think there's something here. So I stayed in student ministry. Then I was told, you should become a youth pastor one day. I was like, oh, here we go. So I went from the 0 to 100, just like you, Mike. And I think after I graduated high school, I was like, I don't know what to do. So I'm going to just go to college and go from there. My sophomore year, I become the student chaplain of my college. It was the first Black person and the youngest person to ever do the job at the same time. And that was like, oh, we making history here too. So this is fun. So I'm helping to pastor over my peers at school. My senior year in college, I get a phone call from a guy that I knew who started a nonprofit, but was also a pastor. And he goes, yo, we started this campus of this church called Imago Dei. Would you want to be down to start the youth ministry at this campus? And I'm like start it from scratch? And he was like, yeah. I was like, bro, I'm only like 21. What do I know? And he was like, come on out here. So long story short, that's how I got involved in vocational ministry. And it took off from there, man. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And are you still doing student ministry, or what are you doing now ministry wise?
Yeah. So I was involved in youth ministry in particular for about, I think vocationally I could say 4.5 years. And then I got into college age ministry, still student ministry, college age ministry for about a year, some change. But while I was doing youth ministry, I was also like a communities pastor and on the teaching team. So it was a whole concoction of roles. But went to this church called Westside, which is the church that I actually started following Jesus at. But then it was called Solid Rock. This guy named John Mark Comer was over 3 different churches. It was all one church. Long story, but I ended up stepping away from vocational ministry this past August to take a career in biblical studies at Bible Project, where I get to now be a professional nerd, you know? So I can't complain, man.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's been a journey, but I will say to see how God has formed me over the years, formed me alongside of people that I was participating in their formation, has hands down been one of the best experiences of my life. The most challenging, the most frustrating, the most upsetting, but yet the most joyful, rewarding, informational thing that I've ever experienced outside of being a husband and a father. So,
sounds like ministry.
Amen. Come on, somebody. Come on.
So you host this podcast called Reconstruct.
Yeah.
I think you guys just concluded your first season, and that is in connection to, I guess, the massive movement of deconstructing that we see, probably particularly among millennials and some Gen Z.
Yeah.
So what gave you the desire to do that? And was there any like personal attachment to that? Was that a process that you went through?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So I always wanted to start a podcast when I was like 25. I was like, yo, it'd be kind of dope to have a podcast. I don't know what I'm going to talk about, though. I'm not that interested. So I ended up having this idea, but I just pocketed it. And then my friend Keith and a guy that we were mentoring named Tom, who then became a friend of mine, they were like, yeah, we're thinking about starting a podcast. I was like, about what? And they were like, reconstructing faith on the other side of deconstructing. I said, well, let's do that. Let me jump in, can I? And we ended up saying, okay, so what are we actually gearing this towards? We're not here to condemn deconstruction. We're not here to determine what it looks like definitively to build faith again on the other side of deconstruction. We're actually three dudes who've been through the journey. And on a personal note, the reason why I'm like, man, it would be helpful. Everybody, I feel like, I think at some point, everybody deconstructs something that they've grown up believing or they've come to believe. The question is, what does it look like on the other side? And what are you going to reconstruct on top of? And for us, it was like, yo, what would it look like for us to walk alongside other people in conversation and say, we want to rebuild life on the teachings of Jesus, the rabbi, not based off of a church tradition, not based off of our preconceived notions about theological convictions. We want to build off of his actual teachings and then go from there. And that's not to say that those other things are wrong or bad. We just want to go, what did Rabbi Jesus actually teach? How did he live out those teachings? And then how did he commission his people to follow in that? And what does that look like to do that in our context today? So I had to go, this will kind of reminisce based off of what I was sharing earlier. I went through a phase of, can I be Black and a Christian? And this isn't to make this whole conversation about ethnicity and faith, but that's really the crux that I had. So I had such a strong, I'm going to phrase it, I had such a strong sway into the faith. And then there came the whole mundaneness of faith. And I got bombarded with questions from relatives, from friends, but I'm also reading these weird watching these weird videos on YouTube, like Christianity is a copycat religion of Egyptology and all of this stuff. And I'm like, man, like, okay, so there's that. I got to deal with that. Then I'm seeing all of the cultural conflicts that are starting to arise within evangelical spaces and what have you. And I'm going, why is there so much resistance to talking about ethnic tensions and ethnic reconciliation and all of that stuff? Is this, like, were my relatives correct? Like, is this antithetical to my culture? Is this antithetical to my being? And I had to wrestle through being Black and a Christian isn't an oxymoron at all. This isn't antithetical, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I went through that. Keithan went through dealing with super, super, super conservative background, and then kind of moving to Portland where it's super, super, super progressive, and kind of getting jostled with that. So he had to move through some things. And Tom kind of had this idolization. I don't want to say idolization, actually. He might listen to this and be like, bro, you done chopped me up all wrong. But he had to work through the ideals of America. And that's not to shoot down our country. I love our country. But he had this view about America. And then all of these things start rising to the surface, especially within the last 5-7 years. And he's like, whoa, I have to work through so many different preconceived notions about the nation that I love. So we've all gone through, and then other people go through deconstruction for whatever reasons. But we do want to see, a new generation to rise up that really is attached to Rabbi Jesus and his people. Can't separate the two, in my judgment. So I hope this is making sense, man.
No, it does. Yeah. I find I generally, and this is part of my personality, I have a challenging personality, Hakeem.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I find that I have an aversion to the word deconstruction when it's used in Christian circles a lot of times, because I don't think we actually mean deconstruction. I think we mean something more akin to just learning. And part of the learning process is unlearning things that we were taught that ended up being wrong. Or maybe we were only given certain aspects of a truth or something that we believe, whether that be about a nation or about conservative values or whatever it is. Yeah. And we learned that it's more multifaceted than that. And so I generally shy away from the term deconstruction because because it's such a technical term and it means something very specific. It's very philosophical. And I think what Christians often mean by deconstruction today is not what Derrida meant when he coined the term deconstruction, or what a lot of the people who kind of walk in his footsteps mean when they describe. They're talking about the interplay between like what a text says and what a text means, and whether or not language can have any, I guess, truly like firm, solid rock meaning, or is it ultimately just something more postmodern?
Yeah.
Would you say that there's any caution that you would give to Christians as they're kind of approaching, because it's very in vogue, the term is very in vogue. And I guess my concern is pastoral, right? Like I'm a local church pastor.
Yeah.
And so would you say that there's any caution that you would give to Christians as they're kind of working through how to undo some of the things that they've learned that are not biblical?
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts for sure. I think the biggest one though is my biggest caution probably is not to go through this type of process of unlearning and relearning by yourself. I think that's a very dangerous, or it can be very dangerous for one's faith or one's process. Because no human is designed to live in isolation, especially when they're going through something tough or going through something that's kind of shattering categories that they held so firmly. And I can speak from experience, but when you do so in community, I think you create a space where not only does it protect you from, I don't know, it could be whatever that might, hinder your process, but I think communal life is what we're designed for. And I think when we go through, not crises, I don't want to call all unlearning, you know what I mean? But I don't want to call all of that like, oh, it's a crisis whenever you go through that. Whenever you're going through a hard time, I think it's best to do that in community. That's probably my biggest caution, because what I've seen and what I have been really tempted to do, I almost left the faith because I was doing so on my own, trying to figure out every category that is being bumped up against. It's like, okay, you're saying this is a copycat faith. What books do I need to read? But I'm not having any conversation with anybody who may have ever heard that to help balance out and create some nuance in many of my conclusions. And not to say that my working through it on my own was completely void, because it wasn't. Like I actually learned some stuff that gives me some tools to be like, nah, that's a false premise. It's a false statement. And I can stand on some facts behind that. But it was so close for me, or so tempting for me just to be like, man, this is too complicated. The way of Jesus doesn't make sense for somebody that looks like me, or it doesn't make sense for the communities that I've come from, or it doesn't make sense for blah, 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 blah. But then later on, after I worked through that process, I started I started asking questions to those who've walked the faith longer than me, who come from similar backgrounds, but yet were still convicted about this man named Jesus. And I'm going, well, what made you hang on? And I think those conversations continue to solidify me during my process of reconstructing. And I'm not saying that I'm done. You know what I mean? Like there's always a growth and progression in our development as disciples of Jesus.
Agreed.
It's probably my biggest caution,
Don't do it alone.
Yeah, don't do it alone. That was a long way to say that. Yeah.
It's interesting because like it's sort of, you said, like the word deconstruction can now mean so many different things, right? And Hakeem, you're talking about not doing it alone, not doing it in community with other people. But I think what I'm seeing, and again, same local church pastor.
Or doing it in community.
Community, yeah. So what I'm seeing, local church pastor is, and I guess there are some of those that are saying, okay, I'm deconstructing my faith in a sense of like theologically, and I'm trying to better understand all of this. What I seem to see a lot of, and maybe this is why you guys have sort of talked about on the other side of deconstruction, meaning I'm not deconstructing necessarily my faith, but some of the things that were kind of around my faith that I grew up in, right? Like my day, deconstruction was like sitting on a roof, smoking a pipe, reading Donald Miller and Rob Bell. Like that was deconstruction. Like we thought we were deconstructing, right? Now deconstruction is I say I'm leaving the faith, but really I'm kind of leaving the institution of church for XYZ. So people are using that as like, that is their deconstruction. Therefore, they are removing themselves completely from any of that community.
Well, I think what it is it's a general aversion towards certainty. And I think that's the issue with deconstruction. And I like, whether you're using the language of unlearning and learning or deconstructing and reconstructing, what we're saying together is that the mind can be open, but then the mind needs to close again on something. And so as a Christian, I think it's okay to have a reasonable amount of desire for certainty on certain things. And that's not always the path, though, that people go. A lot of times when they quote unquote deconstruct, or when they actually deconstruct, they end up arriving in this place of just permanent openness, and they're too afraid to be certain about issues, whether that's the resurrection of Christ, or whether that's about a biblical sex ethic, or whatever the subject is, because certainty is kind of seen as today almost immoral. If I'm certain about that this is true, that means I'm certain that what you believe over here is not true. And that doesn't vibe too well in our postmodern culture. And so I guess that's kind of like the danger that I see for people is having an unnecessary aversion towards certainty, because I think we're made to be certain on some things. Does that make sense?
I mean, even the thought of I'm certain that I'm uncertain is a certainty. You know what I mean? It's like, does that make sense? And I don't disagree that there are things that we are. So everybody has convictions about something, and everybody has a line that they draw with whatever conviction or moral act or what have you. And it's like, why do you draw that line? It's because you have a certainty about that thing, right? So I don't disagree with that premise. The question is, what are the reasons behind why people are deconstructing or unlearning their traditions, right? Because I think about, Mike, you just said something about they're deconstructing the things around the faith, but then that can also lead to different pathways. And I'm wondering, what is the basis? And I think what we're trying to discover in conversations that we just filmed for season 2 or recorded for season 2, and what we will continue to do, is try to get at the root of like, okay, why is this taking place? And then what have you done to cultivate a new practice of faith? And it goes to different directions and it leads to different things. And I don't know. I guess that's just the journey of figuring out what this faith can lead to. And I don't know. So I'm like trying to think on the fly too.
I mean, I think when it really comes down to like what your foundations are, right? Like, I presuppose that the Bible is true. So if I'm deconstructing my church tradition and I want to reconstruct, or I'm unlearning my tradition and I want to learn the truth, I'm going to go to what I presuppose is true. You said it in a much more in a way that I think modern day believers they're more drawn towards learning the teachings of the Rabbi Jesus. How did he live those out, and how did he commission those who followed him to live those out as well? And how do we do that in our context today? On a reductionistic level, you could say, what does the Bible teach? As long as we're then understanding, okay, how do I read the Bible? What's a proper hermeneutic? Yada, yada, yada. And so, but that presupposition is really necessary in order to reconstruct something firm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For me to kind of like to build a house that I can live within. So
let me say this, Jake. Let me just say this real quick. And I'll say this boldly because I already know I have some folks that disagree with me on this conversation that I've had. But I genuinely believe if there's a tearing down, for the lack of a better phrase, if there's like a deconstructing of a house, I genuinely believe that outside of Jesus of Nazareth and his way of life and his rubric of life, every other foundation that you build upon will cause your house to fall at some point. It might stand for 30, 40 years, but I do think it'll crash at some point. So for me, the presupposition is that Jesus is truly the way to life and life abundant. And I don't mean that like, oh, go to heaven when you die. Whatever. I'm talking about like here and now and what is to come. He is the route, the rubric of life that leads to our flourishing ultimately. And that's not to say that other things and other pathways don't make you feel good, that you can't experience joy in, that you can't experience and grow in love. I'm just saying Jesus is the best way, or he is the ultimate way of life. And I'm just going to leave that there on the table and let people discover that for themselves, because I think I was actually teaching at a college in Newburgh, which is a suburb off of Portland as well. And I said, well, there's really only two ways that you can go about this. You can trust Jesus in what he says, or you don't, right? And there's only one way to find out if what he said is actually true, if who he claims to be is actually true, and that's to trust him. Or you can go about your business and follow another rabbi. Everybody is a disciple of something or somebody, everybody. The question is, who's your teacher and what are they teaching you? And I was giving prime examples. I'm like, yo, this isn't to spit ill on the graves of people that I love, but I have friends and relatives who have died this past year because they were taught in the streets or under the rabbi of drugs or this, that, and the third. And that's not to try to create some extreme example or some straw man or whatever. I'm just saying what I've actually witnessed, and what I was tempted by is to subscribe to this way of life. And it led them to death, literally, not just in a, you know what I mean? We go to the spiritual really quickly. I'm talking about literally these people are no longer here. And I'm going, dang, what is it about that teacher of street life, or the folks that taught them how to run game on the streets or whatever? I hope this is making sense.
Yeah,
it is.
What I'm really trying to say is this. Had it not been for Jesus and me seeing his way of life as truly good for me and those around me, I have no idea where I would be. And I know that can be really cliche to say, but had I not done that, I could actually be in jail. I could be in the grave because I come from the same environments that the folks that are in the grave right now came from. That's not fluffy duffy Jesus-y stuff to me. That's real life. No, this man actually changed my life. And I refuse not to encourage others to follow this. I think it leads to actual life. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Sorry, I get a little passionate.
No, it's good.
I love it. I love it.
And yeah, I guess in connection to that, right? Like you're making a choice to submit yourself to the teachings of a man whose teachings are recorded by other men who wrote what we call the New Testament. Yeah. And a lot of times those teachings for us as humans, they rub up against us the wrong way. Like I don't, my humanity, my flesh doesn't like what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount. I don't like what Paul calls the true marks of a Christian in Romans from a fleshly perspective, but I submit to it because I believe it to be true.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing that our generation has to like reconcile with is like, you're not going to like all of this. And, we can try all kinds of fancy ways to like modernize it and contextualize it and make it. And this is the danger of deconstruction to me is the meaning can be endless.
I see.
Because that's what deconstruction is kind of getting at. It's like, here's what the text says, but the meaning of it is not necessarily what I read it to be. It's rooted in postmodernism. And so I think it's helping our generation come back to the point of like, this guy said something and he meant something when he said it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we best get at that meaning so that we can submit ourselves to it and live by it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
No, it makes me think about, you're sort of talking about the reality of what your life could have been had you not had this encounter with this man named Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're sort of talking about like, when this man says something, he means it, right? Mm-hmm. All of that to me is hard to separate. And here's where I go as someone who got saved very radically in a Holy Spirit encounter, right? Where there have been times since I've been saved where I don't know if deconstructed is the right word, but I've been ready to throw out everything I had ever been taught. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there were times in my life where I went the exact opposite of what I knew God had for me. But it always went back to this, maybe like it went back to with you, where it's like, I could have been X, Y, or Z. For me, it went back to like, man, I had this encounter with the Holy Spirit that I can actually never wrap my head around not being real.
Right.
And so I go back to those moments where I've been like, wait a minute, do I really believe X, Y, or Z? Or do I really like this institution? You name the thing that I wanted to deconstruct. It always went back to, but I had this encounter that I can never ignore. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, like I hear these stories about people deconstructing and walking away from the faith because of, X, Y, or Z. And I almost like, I almost don't even want to say it, but it's like, I found myself going, did they ever, like, where was that encounter with God for them? Right. So like you can sit here and go, this man said this, it's true, with conviction that you have no doubt in. You can go, Hakeem, man, I know where I could have been if it wasn't for this guy. And I just wonder, like, for these millions of people or thousands of people that we hear about deconstructing, why did that never get solidified with them? Like, why can't, like, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, that gets into a theological conversation.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's just crazy to me to hear you, Hakeem, say, this is why I always go back to this first principle of who Jesus is. Mm-hmm. He is life. Mm-hmm. And you can say with such conviction, when he says something, he means it and it's true.
Yeah. I'm saying the same thing Hakeem is saying.
Yeah.
I'm just getting at the layer. I'm getting at the uncomfortable layer beneath. It's like, he is life because the Bible says he is life. And then when I take that at its word and I have relationship with him, then I actually experience the life that comes from him. But I wouldn't know that if the Bible didn't tell me.
Right.
Yeah. And all of this, what you just shared, well, both of you just shared, and what I just was talking about, it makes me think about Peter, right? I'm not questioning, but I'm asking, maybe that's the same thing. I'm asking the question, what made Peter go back to fishing after he encountered Jesus for 3.5 years or so, right? Mm-hmm. What made you go, I'm going to go back to what I know? Mm-hmm. What is that? Mm-hmm. And is that similar to what some folks are experiencing? Or you may have encountered Jesus, and I know that can get into a whole theological conversation, but you may have actually encountered Jesus in a variety of ways, but yet still go, this isn't it for me, Chief.
Yep.
And I'm actually piecing out on that. And what is preventing me from doing that? I'll say this, it sounds like a direct quote from a rapper named KB. It's my dude, by the way. Where he said, my biggest fear in life is walking away from Jesus. That is my biggest fear in life. I can still feel these convictions today, like, my life could have been different, but I don't exempt myself from actually walking away from this man that has actually changed my life. The question is, why am I still compelled to him? And this goes back to that same teaching I was given at the college, where I said, I'm compelled to him for these reasons. The question is, are you compelled for whatever reasons he may be revealing to you? But there's only one way to find out if what he said is true, which you find in the Bible, but also you have to experience it. You have to live it out. If you look, the Sermon on the Mount is pivotal for me. I've underappreciated the Sermon on the Mount for much of my walk with Jesus. And it wasn't until the recent, like 2-3 years where I'm like, this was game changing. But when he talks about, let me not even pull it up. There's a bunch of things that he talks about in there, But when I go, there's something adulterous that I'm doing if I look at another human being, like if I look at a woman lustfully, and I'm married, if I look at a woman lustfully, there's something that I'm doing in that lust that's adulterous.
Mm-hmm.
I can believe that, or I could not. Mm-hmm. Or I could say, yo, there's something that it actually does to me that distorts who God has made me to be if I do that type of thing. Or I can go about my life and continue to do me. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, I like how she look, or I like how she look. I'm going to go about this. Mm-hmm. There's only one way to actually know, and that's to experience it, right? So I don't know what it is about this man from Nazareth that is claimed to be alive today, mm-hmm. that I believe and actually put my trust in. I don't know, man. Sorry, let me just cut myself off there. I don't know what it is about this man that continues to compel me. I don't have the words to describe. My prayer, though, out of my inability to describe, is that I pray other people will be compelled mm-hmm. too. Mm-hmm. And that's all I can hang on to. Can't force anybody to not deconstruct. Can't force anybody to come to the faith. I can't force myself to stay here. Mm-hmm. But what I can do is say, I trust what is written down in these texts. I'm going to live by them, and I pray to God that I'm doing something that's true.
Mm-hmm. I think what's helpful is coming to terms with the fact that just because we have bad experiences, mm-hmm. or just because, the trimmings and trappings of our traditions let us down in various ways, we have to be humble enough to go to the Word and look at it for ourselves, but not by ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think is an important distinction. That's maybe another way of talking about the process of learning in community. Is we have a very large group of YouTube Christians who are just are used to having the Bible spoon fed to them, a few verses a Sunday on a message.
YouTube Christians.
And then when catastrophes hit, that's not going to do it for you. Mm-hmm. And so, and even, before YouTube was a thing, you could have grown up in church your entire life, but it was never more than just a mini meal once a week on a Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And so it was never something you did for yourself. And I think that if we're humble enough to go, other people are allowed to let me down, mm-hmm. without me kind of walking away from the whole thing, mm-hmm. And give people the grace to fail us, because we fail people all the time, mm-hmm. but maintain a belief that Jesus isn't going to fail us. And so if we come back to his words and submit ourselves to them, then there is that abundant life that mm-hmm. we desperately desire and crave.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like Jesus will never fail you, but he won't meet all your expectations. Mm-hmm. Think about the people that witnessed this man in like real time, had all these anticipations about what a Messiah would be like, what he would do, who he would hang around, all of that stuff. And a lot of those expectations weren't met. And even some of the prophecies haven't been fulfilled yet because he ain't come back to finish the job, right? So mm-hmm. It's like, but he's faithful to never fail us. And the question is, what's the difference between those two? Mm-hmm. And that's the journey, right? Jesus will never fail me. And that is something I'm glad that you said that, bro. It's actually a good reminder to me. Jesus will never fail me or those around, like his family, his body, his church. He will never fail. But we can place expectations upon him that he's never promised to to live up to
Yeah.
or to meet. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean?
No, he has no intention of fulfilling every single whim and desire that we have.
Yeah. It's like, I want Jesus to vote like me. Like that's an expectation, right? That a lot of us may have thought or have or may still have. And it's like, nah, bro, he's not interested in that. Like he has a different way of ruling and exercising authority than what we might be accustomed to, you know? That's just one example. And that's not even to throw a bomb out there. That's just an example.
I don't think Jesus votes.
Yeah. Hey, look, man, I'm here. I'm here with you, man.
I think he chooses.
You think what?
Yeah. I think he chooses.
There you go. Oh man, that's really good. I think just to, kind of close this, bring this to a close, to land the plane, if you will. I think what's interesting is even in the midst of this, encouraging one another back and forth. And Hakeem, I know you mentioned it too, just having people that you're walking with and having people that you're doing this with. And that doesn't just mean like walking through deconstruction with, like, that just means walking through life with. You guys both go back to community and relationship. And you, Hakeem, talked about a guy who's been a mentor to you since you were a teenager. Like, I don't know, I guess for lack of a more cliche way to end this, it's like the people we're around mean everything. And they're the ones that keep reminding us that Jesus is who he is. And I don't know, I guess, why don't you guys just like leave us with a little thought on what does that mean? Why is it so important that we're doing this with other people who can sort of like just remind us of those truths that Jesus doesn't want to just like fulfill every whim and desire and dream for us and maybe his expectations.
Because you can't actually become like Jesus apart from being around other people, especially Jesus people. It's a little bit cliche, but I can't be loving if I don't learn how to love someone. And if somebody doesn't tempt me to be unloving, I have to be agitated and I have to be rubbed the wrong way. And that's the necessity of community is learning to actually live like Christ, because you have people to be Christ-like towards. Yeah. So I think that's a thing.
You took the words out of my mouth. It's like you can't obey the teachings of Jesus by yourself. It's like how you love your neighbor when you ain't got no neighbors to love on, right? Or, I think community provides the opportunities for us to step into what it means to be more like Jesus. It creates the opportunities for the Spirit. Well, let me just try to get my words right. The Spirit is in all of it. But what I'm trying to say is people-to-people interactions present opportunities for us to live into the way of Jesus. It's like this movie is complex, but you know the movie like Bruce Almighty? Okay, you remember Morgan Freeman was playing God? Whatever you want to say about all that. But, there was a couple scenes in there, and then it was Evan Almighty that came after that.
Yeah.
And I think there was a question in the second one when Morgan Freeman is like, when you pray for patience, does God make you patient or does he give you opportunities to be patient? And I was like, yo, Morgan Freeman is an atheist, but that question right there was as powerful as I've heard, bro. I don't care what you say. Common grace, right? But whatever. It was in that thought or in that question that I go, man, those opportunities come with other people, come with being in community. How do you capitalize on an opportunity to be patient if you have nobody to be patient with? I'm just reiterating what Jake just said. That's it. So my biggest
God is learning him patience through me being in his life.
It's mutual.
Come on. So like this right here, what we just experienced was church. We got three brothers chopping it up about their rabbi. And I think we just edified one another. And we got to exhibit some of the teachings of Jesus just in a 54-minute conversation just now, So, yeah, we need each other in order to follow Jesus. I think we're absolutely essential.
I think one other aspect in the same vein is the church is inherently a missional community. And to land in that unsafe place of I'm just going to follow Jesus alone is not only to land in a place where you can't practice your Christianity, but you don't really have any hope of fulfilling the mission. And I think that's true just on the basis of you don't have all the gifts of the Spirit. No one Christian does.
Yeah.
And it takes all the gifts of the Spirit for working in conjunction with one another, which is what a church is. At least it's one way of understanding it, in order for us to fulfill the Great Commission. And so to me, arriving at that place where it's just too hard to do it together is essentially just kind of waving the white flag and saying the mission's not worth it.
And what I hear you saying underneath is
deconstruct what I'm saying. Can you deconstruct?
Let me break it down. Let me reconstruct it. What I hear you saying underneath all of that is it's actually a disservice to your own formation not to be in life with other people. That's what I hear you saying at the bottom of all of that. It's actually a disservice to yourself to try to do it in isolation. It's like you can't grow apart from somebody else, you know? It's like, if I really think about the body of Christ, like as like a physical entity, it's like imagine a pinky trying to grow outside of its attachment to the rest of the body. It's like physically impossible. It withers away if it's detached, right? That's what I hear you saying. Am I on par with that?
I think that's 100% correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Definitely.
Not 99. We got 100. We good.
100%. 100%. Hakeem, man, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today, man. We're gonna have to do this again for sure.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course. Absolutely.
This was dope, man.
Where can people find you online? Where can people find you?
I guess this is typical. I have an Instagram. It's called Hakeem Bradley 1.
Where can people listen to your podcast?
Oh, that too. Sorry. Thanks for the plug. Our podcast can be found on Spotify or Apple. It's just called Reconstruct. And it'll have like some weird skull logo to play on Ezekiel, but it looks like a motorcycle gang.
Nice. Love it. We'll link to it in the show notes, but cool. Hakeem, man, thank you. We'll do this again for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
All right, brother. Talk to you soon.
Right.